South Korea was an obvious choice to me because that is the world's most wired country. They have the highest percentage of internet access and highest percentage and cheapest of broadband internet access of any country in the world. So it's considered to be, by the International Telecommunications Union, as the world's most wired country. And so for me, the interesting question was trying to understand why that is. In terms of the other countries, I picked Estonia as an example of a European country that not very many people know about, and it's an example of a country that is really a technological leader. This is the home of Skype. This is the home of the world's first internet voting that happened almost 10 years ago. Iran is a country that has gone really back and forth with respect to the internet. You could say it's almost like a cat and mouse game between people who want to freely express themselves on the internet and the government that wants to crack down on that, clamp down on that, and is trying to use it for its own propagandistic purposes. And then finally, Senegal was a country that I think, again, is not very well known in many parts of the world. It's a country that I lived in as a student for about half a year, almost 10 years ago, in 2002, 2003. And there I spent a lot of time in cyber cafes, and I spent a lot of time talking to people about how they use the internet, what they use it for. And there was a great, at that time, hope that Senegal could be a country where internet access could rise and grow. Unfortunately, that hasn't been the case, and I think it's a good example of understanding some of the limitations for internet access in the developing world as a whole and sub-Saharan Africa in particular. Well, it's interesting. When I first started working on this book, I'm an optimistic person by nature, and I generally believe that over the long term, things get better in the world. I feel like I wanted to believe that the same was true for the internet, that, you know, if you have more internet and more technology and more communication, that of course that is automatically better. And I feel a little bit, one of the things I like to say is making the comparison with a TV show that was popular 10, 15 years ago, The X-Files, right? And if you remember The X-Files, you may remember that the main character, Fox Mulder, has a poster in his office that says, "I want to believe." And this is sort of how I feel about the power of the internet to bring democracy, for example, to other countries, like Iran especially. I want to believe that that's true, and while I may have believed that when I first started, I don't believe that now. Today, there is a vibrant blogging community, both in English and Persian. I think, though, that many people, because of what has happened with people getting arrested and people being intimidated, I think that there is still some degree of fear, some real fear that does exist. In fact, just this past summer, the Iranian government sponsored a blogging competition within the country. And of course, to qualify for this blogging competition, your blog had to not be blocked in Iran, which meant that you had to fulfill all of the kind of good Islamic values that they want people to follow. So of course that limited the pool a fair bit. But it's also important to keep in mind that there are a lot of conservative blogs that are supported by the government, by people who either themselves actually support those values or who are being supported in other ways by the government. Iran, for the moment, has given a number of speeches. Many Iranian officials have said, okay, we're going to step up our graduate level studies programs in cyber defense and cybersecurity. That's plausible. Other people have made statements within the Iranian government that are just outright ludicrous. For example, one government official said that they were going to ban all viruses from the country. I don't really know how that's going to work out. They've also said that they're going to ban VPNs. These are encrypted connections that people use or can use for the purposes of circumventing the Iranian filtration system. Again, that's possible, difficult, but possible. Iranian officials have also said that they want to create something called a halal internet. I don't really know exactly how that would work. This presumably would be kind of a souped-up version of the internet that they have now, which is very filtered and surveilled and has a lot of blocked websites and such. So beyond giving kind of rhetorical speeches in that way, Iran for the moment hasn't done anything to retaliate in that respect. But one can imagine that they're probably working on some things. They continue to surveil people. They continue to filter their domestic internet. In fact, this week, the United States unveiled what it was calling a virtual embassy, because the United States and Iran don't have diplomatic relations. So the United States created a website targeting Iranians living in Iran, giving information in Persian about how to get visas and other types of information that might be interesting to Iranians. Of course, the moment it was turned on, it was blocked instantaneously from within Iran. And the US has publicly protested this and so forth. Being here has really opened my eyes to ideas of privacy and ideas of data protection. And it's interesting that from what I understand about German data protection law, one of the key fundamental concepts is this idea of express consent and express permission, that a business or a government agency, before they collect any data of any kind, ranging from my height to the color of my shirt, I either have to give express permission, or there has to be some law that is created that allows a government agency to do that. America in general, and I would say Silicon Valley in particular, has in some ways the complete opposite attitude. Because we don't have these laws, and perhaps also because we don't have this culture, the feeling is do whatever you want until someone tells you to stop. And that's basically what Google did with Street View, right? Google didn't ask anyone's permission to drive cars all over the United States. That was now almost 5 years ago that they started doing that. And take pictures of buildings and streets and whatever. And when it came out in the United States, nobody really cared. I mean, maybe some very small people who were very, very concerned with civil liberties and privacy made a few statements, but you definitely didn't have the degree of outrage and the degree of public discussion that happened here in Germany at that time.